Thought I'd sign in a minute early, mostly because I'm dying to see if this is going to function today. Last week was kind of frustrating. I see a couple messages came through, so I think my chat is working. Every week that we do this, there's some people that their chat isn't working, and I'm told they can log out and log back in, and maybe it'll start working. I can't do that because then the link is broken, and if I log back in, it has to be set up on a completely different link, and you're not going to know where it is, and yeah, it's problematic. So got a minute to go. Here is my day today. It's a little overcast. A little overcast today. All right, it's 11 o'clock. Everything seems to be working. And all of a sudden, somebody's playing a radio here in the background. Today, I've actually got a lot to go over, and I think you're going to find most of it pretty useful, pretty valuable. And today is going to be a little mixture. I'm going to talk about Colombia, and at the end, I'm going to talk about what's going on in Ecuador. Basically, the topics today, I'm going to give a fundraising update, what's going on with that. Some of you are interested, others don't care. Bear with me, I won't take too long with it. Then I'm going to answer a question that just constantly keeps coming up. Why Colombia? Of all the places, you've traveled here, you've traveled there. Why did you decide to settle down in Colombia? So I'm going to try to answer that, and that'll be, pretty involved. I've answered it partly before, but I'm really going to try to get to some of the nitty-gritty today. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about my Circassia trip, the video that just went out, ended up being 2 or 3 days late. I learned a lot on that. I'll talk about my friend Linda, who was in that. I've gotten all kinds of questions about that. And then, and Linda, if you're watching, hello. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about the strikes in Ecuador. And as always, try to hold your questions till towards the end. I'll cue you in when we're getting there. About the time we get to strikes in Ecuador, that's when you can post them up. But please, please, please put 4 question marks before your question. Today may run over a little bit. My part will probably run over a little more than the 30 minutes. Okay, fundraising. First of all, the GoFundMe and Patreon subscribers this past couple weeks, thank you very much. I noticed that I haven't been able to reply to a couple. I'll make sure that I get that done. As far as the camera's going, I'm in pretty good shape now. And I will address the problems that I'm having with the new camera, but it's not with the camera itself. It's just learning curve. My cell phone. Before, if you recall, I used my cell phone and I could put it in this Osmo 2, kind of a big, where's my other hand? Big, I don't know, I can't do it. Pretty good size stabilizer. And it was very extremely noticeable. And if you're a thief, you probably drool over it because it looks really expensive. It wasn't horribly expensive, but it actually came from a contributor. So that worked really good. And then my cell phone died, just blew up. And I got a Samsung S7, if you recall, but then the video kept glitching. There was something wrong with it. Everything else worked perfect, but the video just didn't work. It would move and freeze and move and freeze. And I tried different SIM cards. It just, there was an issue with the phone. Well, lo and behold, going on, I think about 2 weeks ago, right after I sent and paid for the connector so I can register the Osmo. Somebody here that I know, he had Samsung S8 Plus, and he had cracked the front screen. He wanted to trade me for the S7, which was uncracked, because the performance of it, they're very similar. They're virtually the same. And I told him, my video camera is crap. The camera itself was great, but the video, he never does video. So I get a cracked screen, and he gets a non-cracked screen. I took him up on it. I mean, hey, you can't beat that. There's about $100 difference in cost here from one to the other here, and the screen is somewhere around that with all the parts, because it's glued in, and it's quite a process. So I took him up on it. So I've got the S8, and I've tried a little video with it. I haven't put it on the Osmo, but it works good. So I've got everything that I had before. The GoPro that died, I've now had the Osmo Pocket. I can throw it, in my pocket, and I could take moving, walking, stabilized pictures, which you can't with a cell phone unless you bring the big contraption. Plus, I've got the, we'll say, studio camera, the Canon camera. So I'm good there. Cameras, I think I'm all set for a period of time. My laptop, I'm having problems with it. It's relatively new. I mean, I think it's only about a year old, but all the keys are sticking, and it's doing some strange things. I don't know what's up with it. It's an HP. I've never had problems with HP before. So I'm going to plan at some point. I don't know, what the priority is going to be, but I was looking in Amazon. You can get refurbished these small footprint, but very powerful editing computers, which shipped here with tax and everything is going to run about $350. So it's kind of back burner, but I think at some point I'm probably going to need that. And the live software to end this, it's called XSplit. XSplit. Those of you who have asked me questions, you can look that one up. It's about $200, and it seems to be the best price for the best features, and tons of people use it, so it's not like it's an unknown. The other thing is that I'm planning for, what I was asked, why do you need to raise funds? Well, these are the reasons why. I have trips planned. I just need to get them financed. I've got a trip to Medellin, Barranquilla, and Santa Marta. That's going to be kind of a pricey trip. Also, longer term, there's some mid-size locations that I want to hit. Bucaramanga, Belo, and Puerto Lopez. I want to do videos there. That may be a year before I get around to that. And then I have a personal trip back to Cuenca before Christmas, hopefully. Okay, yes, so I will be talking about Ecuador. So let's get to the why Colombia. Yeah, it was only a few minutes, so let's get to the why Colombia. Number one, it's safe. Now, people have this idea that you have the drug cartels and all of that. That's nothing what you think. But for these purposes, I want to talk about a different kind of safety that's pretty important to me. Safety is more than just crime. There's crime everywhere. It varies from city to city, from area to area. All countries, except for the extremes, all countries have a lot of similarity, actually. If you go to inner city Chicago, if you go to inner city Baltimore or Detroit, you're going to have a different experience than if you're in West Virginia, rolling through the countryside. And Colombia and Ecuador and everywhere else, it's all the same. Everybody wants to know about crime, but the truth is you have a lot of control over that. And if you use certain important measures, where you go, how you conduct yourself, how you dress, all of those things. You have some control over, what takes place. I think more important than that is things such as government stability. Now, Colombia is a democratic republic. It's a republic. It's a U.S.-styled republic. And it's been around for a very long time. It actually began as a republic in 1819 with Simon Bolivar. Didn't last too long. While he was an amazing liberator and a military tactician and somebody to be admired and respected, he was about as bad a president as a president could be. He really sucked as far as that goes. So that was the Republic of Greater Colombia, or Gran Colombia. But the Republic as it stands today, in 1863, right around the time of the U.S., there was a civil war here that went on for a couple years. And out of that, in 1886, was established today's version of the Republic. It's a libertarian government. It's kind of a live and let live. It relies heavily on personal responsibility, not in a bad or negative way, but in my view, a very positive way. I mean, you have freedom of speech. You have a constitution that delineates all kinds of personal rights that are very important to me. The government doesn't have a history or a habit of a lot of overreach. Now, somebody can argue, well, but you could go out and party with a beer in your hand in certain parks, and a couple years ago they passed a law that said that you couldn't do that, and the police were, yeah, you get these things that come and go, little bits and pieces, but that was actually repealed. It didn't last very long. People don't really stand for intrusion. I mean, they might as well have a secondary flag here that says, don't tread on me. Hello, neighbor. Balcony next to me. She's staring at me. It's very disconcerting when you're trying to do a video. So there's a lot of personal freedom rights that are written right into the Constitution. And this being a republic for such a long period of time, one of the longer existing ones in the world, not the longest, and I'm not saying that, but it certainly is one of the longer existing ones. Even through all of the problems that they had with the FARC and the narcos and all of that, the government stayed the same, even under threat of, and carried out various assassinations and bombings. And in the 70s and 80s, it just got really crazy here. And through it all, they hung in there. There's a level of independence and courage that would drive them. Well, you had, a lot of people were bought off in corruption, but you had more people in the government that retaining Colombia for the people was more important than the money that was being thrown at them. And it cost a lot of people their lives, but that's how serious and entrenched this libertarian belief is in this country. Not something that goes back to 100 or 200 years ago where people give me liberty or give me death. This was just a few decades ago where it was give me liberty or give me death. And not only I admire and respect that, but it gives me a lot of confidence in the stability of the government of this country, despite all the things you hear, some true, some not true, that what goes on, but the government remains there, remains stable. Free people are a happy people. And you see that when you come to Colombia. You see whether there's poor, and there's abject poverty here. I think I gave you the stats. It's something like 39% here, was it? 33% in the United States. I did that comparison. There is abject poverty, but even if you meet people that are in that category, they're still happy people. You know, they find a reason to live life. It's more important than money here for people for the most part. I'm generalizing, but generalizations are good if you're talking about the majority, is family and the joy of life. It's simply the joy of living is far more important than cash in hand. So you see, even in a country where they work, it's a 6-day work week, and Sundays are off, and Sundays are for family, and that's why in the malls you see so many people come out on Sundays, or walking certain boulevards where, like in Manizales, they close down the main street for a couple miles, and you see families out there rollerblading and skateboarding and bicycling and walking the dogs and just having a good time, because that's what they live for. They live to live. And that attitude is infectious. It's I appreciate it. And then there you have the entrepreneurial spirit where, you know, people don't sit back and hold their hand out to the government, although there are safety nets here, but they don't hold their hand out. They don't, well, yes, there are some beggars, but I mean, speaking in general, if people need money, if they lose their job, they're out doing something. You know, they'll buy something and they'll sell it on the side of the road. They're very self-sufficient, and they have a lot of energy and drive, and I appreciate that also. I've lived in places where that didn't really exist, where people kind of expect something to come to them, and I'm not a fan of that. And there's way too much of that in the USA. Now, concerns. What are my concerns in Colombia? You know, I've been accused of, well, you never say anything negative. Well, in my day-to-day life, I'm so happy, honestly, that it's hard for me to see any negatives. And I tried to come up with that video of the 10 things, and I worked on that for, I don't know, months. And the things that are in there are so innocuous, they're meaningless. It's not because, you know, I'm not painting some rosy, flowery picture. It's just that my life, and these videos are really about my life and my experience, is so good. I don't really have complaints for the most part, but there are concerns about Colombia. My biggest concern, and a lot of people had the same concern during the last election, is there is a worldwide socialist movement, and wherever it takes root, problems ensue. If you're a socialist lover and you're on here, you're not going to like this, but you know, I'm speaking my truth. The movement is in Colombia as well. In the last election, it was a double insult. Not only was it a socialist, but he was a former leader of the FARC, ran for president. And then you had a conservative guy who ran for president. The very fact that he could run for president was, oh, there's that dog. It's that time. It's that time. The very fact that he could run for president, you know, is kind of problematic. But you know, you have a certain level of freedom here. So even scumbags like that, he was a mass murderer. He would architect some of these bombings and assassinations that went on, and they signed a bogus peace treaty, and you know, he gets to run for president. Petra was his name. And then you've got the guy who won, Duque. So it was disconcerting. And to be honest with you, I didn't come to Colombia until after that election. I was a little concerned about it. I was very concerned about it, because if they get into office, all of those things that I just talked about the ability of this republic and all the things that I just went over, would likely be altered to the point where they may not even exist anymore. Certainly the Constitution would be rewritten. It's part of what he ran on. So, you know, that's definitely problematic. Now, it was heartening that he lost by a pretty good margin, politically by a good margin. I would have loved to have seen him completely trounced, but he had support in areas where FARC has always had power, and the criminals that still exist retain power. Now, how those votes were done, I'm sure that a lot of it was coerced, just based on their track record. But he lost by 13%. It was 54% to 41%. It was a concern, and it remains a concern. Here's why it remains a concern. As you've seen in these videos, I meet a lot of people, and I meet a number of people that are going to university. And I talk to them about, well, I ask them. I don't lecture them like I do on videos here. I'm questioned, so it helps me form opinions. And I asked her opinion about the last election or about the presidents, and I've seen a theme with younger people that have recently gone through the university system. I'll say below 30 years old, or people that are currently in it, where this socialist thinking is taking over. The thoughts that the government needs to tax more, to do more, and it's all about taking care of the poor people, which socialism never actually does. But it's a great political tool that people buy into, and essentially they're being indoctrinated here like they were in Ecuador, like they are in the United States. What that means is next time they have an election, or the time after that, as older people that are more conservative die off and younger people come up with these beliefs, there's more of a chance of the socialists winning an election. And I don't want to live through Venezuela or any country like that. You also see in the press here, the news, where there's this constant drumbeat of, it's reminiscent of the U.S. There's this constant drumbeat against the current president. He doesn't care about people. He only cares about big business, and all the things that you hear in the U.S. about, any conservative there, you hear that here. Now, that's partly because of the 6 major news organizations in the world. 5 are owned by avowed socialists. So, it's not to be unexpected. But what concerns me more is the indoctrination that goes on in the university. So all of that is of concern to me. Also, the ELN, we talk a lot about the FARC, but the FARC are really toothless. Even though they came out recently and made this announcement that we're going to pick up arms. I mean, if they've got 1,000 people, they're doing well. The FARC has just devolved into a mess. The real threat I see is the ELN, and they're the group that are on the border of Venezuela. And the reason they're coming back strong is because that border is such a mess. What they're able to do is do their crimes in Colombia and then hop over the border out of the reach of the military or the police. So that, they hop back in. They're assassinating mayors of towns that don't want to get along. This is all on the border. This isn't in the body of Colombia. And then they jump across. They come in, they run a criminal activity. If things are getting hot, they jump back over. So they got to kind of build in protection. In Venezuela, nobody's going to do anything about it. And the Colombian military and police, they're not going to cross the border. They're not going to violate that law despite what's going on. So that's of concern to me, because I could see if they don't figure out how to put a check on that, that could grow. And if it continues to grow, in maybe 5 or 10 years, that could start to have a real influence on major places to live. So that's something to keep an eye on. And the last thing is the Mexican cartel, which, we talk about the FARC on the southern border, but the FARC are there as criminals, but it's really that entire operation is it's being controlled by the Mexican cartels. It seems like they've got endless money, and they've got people from, Ecuador and Colombia and Bolivia and Peru, they're all involved in this mess, this worldwide criminal conspiracy. And you know, that's a concern, although they seem to be you know, keeping somewhat of a rein on it. It wasn't so. If you watch the news every so often, you'll see how the military killed another leader, you know, down there on the southern border, and it happens fairly frequently. So you know, they're on top of it. So those are the concerns that I have. I didn't mention narcos directly because the narcos are nothing like they once were, and in most countries they're actually stronger than they are here in Colombia. So if you're talking about managing other drugs and managing, yeah, there's drugs everywhere in the world. There's drugs in Ecuador. There's drugs Peru, you name it, Louisiana. I mean, there's drugs. It's just a problem. But do you have criminal conspiracies going on? Yeah, but they're not out of the ordinary. They're not what they once were, and they're not any different than pretty much any other place you're going to go. So I don't have a huge concern over that kind of issue, and that's funny. It's because that's the first thing people think of. They think of, you know, Pablo and the narcos and all of that. Now, all that is long gone. It really is. And my concerns are not things that are really occurring. They're things that potentially could occur. Positive, it's a constantly growing economy. For a number of years, it's on an uptick. People, you know, I see people talking about the exchange rate. And it seems there's a lot of misunderstanding of what that exchange rate is. They think it's a Colombian peso that's just going in the tank, and that's not it at all. The Colombian peso, there's no real inflation here. It's very stable here. The Colombian peso unto itself is fine. It's the American dollar that gets stronger and stronger and stronger, and that's what gives that value. You know, and there's good and bad with it. The bad with it in the United States is if you're in the United States trying to sell products, you know, overseas, it's more difficult because it makes your product more expensive to sell to another country. For Colombia, it's a real plus because it makes their product cheaper to sell. Even though inside Colombia, the money is stable, they can get bigger sales on exports, you know, because of that situation. And the U.S. and Colombia have a pretty good trade agreement. So Colombia has been benefiting from that trade agreement, along with agreements with France in Europe, and various other places. I was asked, is China trying to take over the economy here? Colombia does some business with the Chinese, but they never allowed them to get a foothold here to buy into and be beholding to them for various debts or public service projects or things that they've done in China's done in Africa or in Ecuador, where I just came from. So the peso exchange is a positive for me, and it doesn't reflect on Colombia. It's just what's going on in the U.S. It's going to come. It rises and falls. It just, that's how it always works. And as long as you're prepared for when it falls, I think I am. I think I'm pretty set up for that. Then you'll be okay. Another positive is the respect that Colombia has regionally. It has a lot of respect in the United States, but it has respect for the countries around it. Colombia has been more stable than all these countries around it, and that respect lends a certain amount of safety to it. Another positive is the restraint of government. In laws, they don't, as I mentioned, they don't really have a lot of overreach, a lot of personal responsibility. Somebody says, well, is prostitution legal? Yeah, it is legal. And they say, well, how can that be? It's a Catholic country. Yeah, it's a Catholic country, but that has nothing to do with it. It has to do with personal freedom. the freedom to make that decision. So if you're a girl and you want to, make money, for sex, you have that right here. You have that right. Now, they do have laws that are really tough if you're a pimp, for example. So as long as there's no coercion or force to do something or trafficking, then for the girl, the prostitution is legal. But if you're a guy who wants to have 3 or 4 girls to work for them and you're going to slap them around and keep them in line, you're going to go away for a very, very long time. So that's not related to libertarian ideals. That's, the idea, as long as you're not hurting somebody else, then the government should be off your back. Well, there's a strong belief in that kind of thinking, and it shows across the board. And another place that there's a restraint of government is in the tax system and various programs. While there is a safety net here, they've built these safety nets actually with a lot of consideration to be self-sustaining, to be able to continue without having to constantly increase people's taxes to pay for it, or to get into office and promise things that they can't afford and, bloating the budget. The budget here remains relatively stable. And while they have safety net, not like the US, they don't have food stamps, they don't have all that kind of stuff. But somehow people manage to survive, people manage to get by. You don't have any kind of crazy starvation death rate. You don't have any of that stuff that goes on here, because people are going to find it somewhere, and they're not used to, and they don't get just a flat handout. So the system of safety nets work here. I think that's a positive, and I think it's really good the way they do it. I've mentioned a few times about the stratus. You get to choose what stratus you want to live in. If you want to live in the nicest area, you're going to pay a bit of a premium, and that's going to go towards the people at the low end that are struggling to pay for their light bill and water bill. So, I see that as a real positive. Okay, sorry, I just had to take a look here. Circassia. I finally got to Circassia. I've been trying to get there forever, and the cameras just didn't want to cooperate. One of the reasons I went there to see expat, immigrant, gringo named Bob. And I met Bob, very nice guy, salt of the earth kind of guy. A guy that grew up in, and lived his entire life in farm country area, kind of like where I grew up, where we never locked our cars or our houses, and you just didn't have problems. His entire life was like that. He's never really traveled, and he decided that he was going to move to Colombia, and he sold off all his things, and he just moved here. He's been here now 3 months, and he's got a situation. I'm not going to get into anything personal, but I will a little bit. And I have to ask him. I want to do an interview with him at some point, but some of this is a little delicate, and I don't want to, to go there. But he's in a situation right now where he speaks absolutely no Spanish, and he has no experience really in traveling or other cultures or societies. He's 100%. Wow, thank you. Great donation. I really appreciate it. He's 100% dependent on his girlfriend. He met her online and spent quite a bit of time talking to her. I believe he came once to visit her. I may have that wrong, but I think he came once to visit her, like for very short days. And then he sold everything and he moved down here. She seems like a nice lady, got a child. You could see them for a moment. I didn't have their okay or permission, or was my intent to do a lot of video with them, but you could see the lady with the cute little girl, and you see Bob there when we're sitting there and having a beer. Got a helicopter. I don't know if you can hear. I don't know how much you can hear the outside or extraneous noises. I know this mic is somewhat directional. but can play with my mind. So back to Bob. So he's here. He's been here for 3 months. He doesn't speak a word. I mean, maybe he can say "see." And I'm not exaggerating. He has no friends here. He doesn't know anybody here. He's 100%, as I said, dependent on her. All his money, he bought a house in the country just outside of Circassia. He's got a crew cab pickup truck and a couple motos, one for her and one for him. He's got all his money buried into the house and some construction. He's putting a garage on it and a deck. And all of the construction is being handled by her because he doesn't speak the language. And he actually has a certain level of fear of trying to, interact with people. When we were there, I mean, he didn't even go pay for the beers. She got up, to pay for it. So, I'm a little worried about him because he's 100% dependent. And, and let's assume that she's completely wonderful person and would never do anything wrong. What if she got sick for a period of time? He's got to get himself out. So I talked to him a little bit about that. He's got to get out and around. I think he needs to make a few friends so that he's got somebody that can fall back on. I would actually befriend him. He seems like a nice person, but my life is so busy. I'd be a terrible friend, as I mentioned before. I don't really have time, but I'll see him again. I actually want to do an interview with him. But if you're living in and around Armenia and you're watching this, reach out. He needs a friend, and he seems like I said, he's a salt of the earth kind of person, somebody that you could, I think really count on. Okay, so now I'm going to mention Linda because I got a lot of questions about, now who's this pretty girl? I thought this and I thought that. Linda is a very nice person. I met her, I was trying to think when, I would say maybe 7 months ago. I'm thinking 10 months ago. I think I met her shortly after I moved here. So it's about 10 months to Armenia. And she's always worked, and we've seen each other a few times, but we've messaged over the course of all of these months. We keep in contact. We message, maybe not daily, but pretty often. And she didn't tell me until just this last week, but she lost her job, so she's not working. And so there's a fair number of people, you guys, that come here to visit. And so I was thinking, well, maybe she can help show them around, because a lot of times I don't have the time. So I talked to her about that, and just to get a sense of some of the things that I do, which we've discussed before, but she didn't see it. She went along with me to Circassia to kind of see what was going on. And in a video coming up, she was here in town with me, walking around. We were talking about, is this a possibility? And that's why, she was practicing her English. So if any of you guys are coming here and you need a tour guide for, not that much money, it's about, I would say 60,000, for, 5 or 6 hours in a day. And, whatever tip you want to give her, I think it's a win for everybody. You can contact me, but what I would do is give her the information, and then you could talk to each other directly. This isn't going through me, financially. It's something that, I just don't want any part of that. But people need that here, and I'm not always available. Now, we can always schedule for things in particular, like you need to get here and hunt for an apartment, or practical things. Then that's probably easier with me. But just to kind of show around the city, and here's this place and here's that place and this barrio, you don't really need me for that. And I think it's perfect for her. Plus, you know, give her some money. What she really wants to do, her ideal is to work part-time because she's in English school. She's in the university for language, and she wants to put more time into that. And with a full-time job, it's always been difficult. It's part of why, her English, well, I understand her, but it's really at a starting point or close to it. It's because she hasn't been able to dedicate enough time in the school. So if she can do this part time and work on that, then her dream is to do more traveling. And English is the language of the world. Let's face it. So she has a strong desire to learn English. Okay, so hold on just a second here. I don't know what's going on. All of a sudden my chat's dying. Here we are getting close to the questions, and what the hell? Oh my goodness. I don't know what happened. My chat just quit working. Let's get those likes up. Yeah, definitely. I appreciate it. That may be the last comment. My comment box is closed. If you guys would throw a couple comments here in this section to see if it'll move it up for me. It looks like it's just kind of stuck, and the little bar that I would have to move up and down, it's gone. Okay, Sugar Skull, I kind of see a comment there. Still here. Okay, got it. I don't know what happened. It's working now. Appreciate you hanging in there with me and moving those comments up. All right, let's talk about Ecuador for a few minutes, and you can start posting your questions up now. 4 question marks and the question. What's going on in Ecuador? Again, I see people that actually lived in Ecuador for, look at this hair. Think I should get a haircut? Hasn't been this long in years. So you've got people living in Ecuador, some people in Cuenca. I see them on the Facebook pages. They've been there for at least a few years. And they don't seem to have a clue what's going on. I need to pick up a newspaper. There's been a subsidy. Well, there's been a few subsidies. Like you had subsidy on propane gas, and then you had a subsidy on gasoline products. So if you went to the pump, you paid, I don't remember, like $1.19 a gallon for gasoline, and the other couple dollars, $2.50 or whatever, was paid for by the government. Now, when this originated, it was to do with the oil and the refineries and basically the petroleum industry in Ecuador. And this was kind of you call it a profit sharing. It was a way to justify. There was government takeover of some industries because it was kind of going socialist, and in order to justify what had been going on, it was a subsidy for the people, and it was always intended to be to expire. It was intended to expire. Well, the last president, Correa, who turns out was very corrupt and ran the country into some serious debt with the Chinese, he like 3 times what he was telling people. Ecuador financially it's in a bad place. They can't afford these subsidies. They simply can't afford it. There's no when the oil prices fell, I mean, the money just isn't there to do it. Plus, you have this massive debt. The Chinese were trying, because they owned much of this debt. They're trying to flex their muscles and take over certain natural resources, mining, the drilling in the Amazon. They're trying to bully their way in to do these things. And Ecuador basically said, not no, but hell no. But they still have a debt, and you still have a country that can foreclose on you. So if they're not dealing with the Chinese anymore because of how that was working out, what do they do? So they went to the International Monetary Fund. And you have all these conspiracy people, the same people that see the, chemtrails in the sky and the earth is flat. I'm not saying the International Monetary Fund is, an altruistic entity. But what I will say is I'd rather deal with them than the Chinese, because we see what the Chinese are doing. You hear that helicopter? Can you hear that? So the current president is trying to put Ecuador back into financial stability. It's been a few years, and he's trying to get them back there. So he took out a loan of 7 point something, I believe, off the top of my head. I read this a while ago. A little over $7 billion, I believe, through the IMF. But the IMF always has certain conditions, kind of like a bank. Well, we'll give you this loan, but you need to pay off this and you need to do that. So they wanted to see a certain amount of restructuring. And part of that restructuring is eliminate the subsidies, which they had to do anyway, which are long overdue. That's what people seem to completely forget. These were not ever supposed to be permanent. They were always intended to be short term. And they just kept extending it year after year because people got used to it. And, they, cry about it. And the longer it went on, the more it became almost like they're right. Now, the funny thing is their gas prices are still some of the lower gas prices around. I mean, I think it's $3.68 a gallon right now. I mean, what are you paying in the U.S.? Probably $3.80. It's within reason. And in Europe, oh my God, of course, they're all socialist countries, so you've got endless taxes. So there you're going to pay $5, $7, $8 a gallon. But in realistic countries, here in Colombia, it's around $3 and something. So it's certainly a reasonable price, and they should be grateful they don't have huge taxes on top of that, is my view. But they decided to have protests, and these protests have become violent. They're all over the country. They stopped transportation. Even after a couple days, they made an agreement to stop striking the buses and the taxis and the vans. People are ignoring that. You also have people that are semi-socialist with other causes. They're piggybacking on this, and they're creating roadblocks. They're putting fires in the highway so people can't get by. For the first time in forever, the police were out with tear gas, trying to control. This was all over Ecuador. You have a population there that is somewhat submissive. They just kind of go along. They just kind of roll with whatever happens, almost despite whatever the government does or has done. They just kind of go with it. But what happens when you have people like that is when the time comes, they kind of explode. I mean, think of a woman who's just constantly abused. And God forbid, God forbid what she cuts off when you're sleeping, or, the house burns down or whatever. I mean, it's that kind of pent up rage, which is taking place, and it's taking place all over. So is it unsafe? Well, it isn't yet. You never know for sure how these things go. Personally, I think it's just unrealistic. Somebody should be standing up and saying, you don't have this coming. Stop acting like children. You don't have it coming. He also, the president, did a really nice thing, I thought. This is going to be huge for so many people. He's eliminating the import tax on things like computers and cell phones. So instead of being 4 times the cost, it's going to be the cost. And I think that's going to be a huge thing, and it's going to be a huge thing for the people of Ecuador. And I think it's going to more than offset the difference in gas prices, especially considering that most people use public transportation anyway. Now, will the public transportation go up? Yeah, it probably will go up, but it goes up all the time. You know, despite that, it went up. There was a rate increase, another one, and this was when the gas prices were subsidized and wasn't going up. So, you know, so it's going to go up. It won't go up any, you know, outrageous amount. People will pay a little bit more, but they're going to have this benefit to offset it. So, am I concerned with what's going on with Ecuador? In general, I'm concerned with Ecuador because of the position the last president put them in. They are so close to the edge of bankruptcy. The healthcare system runs $4 billion in debt every year, and money has to be taken from other places to go there. I mean, government doesn't produce anything, so that money all has to come from the people, is what it boils down to. And the people can't really afford to just keep paying more and more and more. So it's a mess there. It's a financial, I would almost classify it as a disaster. If services start getting cut, if police are cut, which they actually are in some places, if key parts of the budget, you know, like people say, oh, Ecuador is so safe. Well, it's not as safe as they want to think it is, but it's not bad. But if you start cutting the police, you're going to have some serious problems there, because you have organized crime in Ecuador that people don't seem to understand. They don't seem to get. Mexican cartel driven, and it's throughout Ecuador. And if you start cutting back police, and if you start cutting back efforts by the government to rein these things in, you know, at some point there could be a breaking point. So I'm concerned about what's going on there, and hopefully this will all kind of mellow down. But the thing is, when you have people that are just kind of pent up, it could explode into something really ugly. I suspect it won't. If you want to visit Ecuador, I wouldn't let this cause you to not visit, but I would try to delay at least a few more days to see what's going on with the transportation strike. Well, the strike is over, but if these roadblocks are removed and order is somewhat restored, it's one thing to have protests. There's nothing new about that. This was several levels above that. Okay, let's get to questions. Average for gas in the US, $3. Seriously? $3? Wow. I didn't realize it was so low. What the heck's going on there? Okay. $2.65 in Oklahoma. Yeah, but these aren't questions. Let's get to the questions. Yeah, it's true. The official currency of Ecuador, the only currency, is the US dollar. They can't print more money. That was a real plus for them. It always will be a plus. It's what saved the economy last time around. They had issues. But you just can't go out and spend 3 times more than, you know, what the budget is, and lie to your own government about that money being spent. Now it comes due. Where does it come from? And they don't print their own money, so they can't just artificially print. Of course, that would destroy the currency anyway. That's what they did last time around. Their currency used to be called the sucre, the sweet. But that's okay. Whole other thing. How much is a haircut? How much is a haircut? Sorry, I had to go up to see it. Haircut here in Armenia? Well, it depends where you go. There's prices all over, but I would say going price is maybe 10,000, 12,000 pesos. So it's what, $3.20 maybe. Uh, Cheap. There's a really good hair cutter. What do you call them? Barber. That I was going to, and the reason this has been growing is because I went to see him, and I didn't realize, but it was on his lunch hour, and I saw his doors were locked, but you could see him sprawled out on the floor, and he was sleeping, and his employee. And then I went another time, the same thing happened. I mean, it's on me. And then it was already grown quite a bit. So I said, well, I just won't cut it for a while, see what happens. But he's very good, and a lot of people go there, and I think it's either 10 or 12,000 pesos there. When I was in Manizales, I got my haircut a couple times, and it was 10,000 pesos. They had a big sign in the front. And so I think the 10,000 pesos, man, it's getting noisy. That helicopter just keeps coming around. So I think the going price is about $10,000 for a low end price, and goes up to maybe 12,000. We have any other questions? Yeah, I saw an article briefly, glanced at it. The Chinese tried to set up an oil company in Venezuela, and apparently the people running it got arrested by the Venezuelan government. I know nothing about that. I wouldn't be surprised, because the Chinese are heavily invested. So Venezuela is deep into debt with the Chinese. They're also deep into debt with the Cubans. The Cubans, in exchange for oil, they were providing government military services. So it was like gun for hire. And so the price tag came with that. And Venezuela can't produce oil anymore. That's a sad story. If you don't know it, I can tell that story sometime, not today. But they have almost no production ability anymore. And so for the Chinese to come and want to do that would make perfect sense, and Venezuela owes them. But I don't know what it would be horrible if they did that, because when Venezuela does stabilize and this guy's out and the government takes control again, it isn't just this. The entire government has basically been pushed out of power, and so they're kind of sitting in the wings. And if they take control again, that'll be a real problem if the Chinese get in there and get entrenched. So we'll see what happens. I will look for that, just out of curiosity. Any other questions? Buzz cut it yourself. I've done that many times. When I was living in Ecuador, I did that a bunch of times because I kept it so short. And I actually can cut hair. But my thing is, I don't know if I want to. I haven't had longer hair in so long. I'm just kind of curious. And a couple girls that I see and go out with, they keep telling me, no, let it grow, let it grow. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. It's very unkempt. It's doesn't feel very comfortable to me. All right, we don't seem to have any more questions, and we've gone about an hour. Last call for questions. Anybody want to know anything about anything that we covered or otherwise? I thank you for the contribution. I very much appreciate it. Okay. Oh, what's the next city I'll explore with my new Osmo? That's a really good question, and I don't have an answer yet. I can't afford to go to Medellin yet. I would love to go there because you guys are so interested in Medellin. So I want to show you parts of Medellin, but I also want to show you some things about Medellin that often don't come up in videos. And or some of the reasons why I would never live there, although it's a magnificent city. So I would love to do that, but I can't do that yet. And it's probably going to be a month or so before I can. So in the meantime, what am I going to do? Well, I was thinking about that. I will probably go to Montenegro. I never did cover that. I never did cover El Aden, which are here in Condillo. El Aden is where the airport is. So cover, and there's also a lot of haciendas, countryside with these mansions there. So I'll probably do that. And I'll probably try to get in, it's not horribly expensive, to the coffee park, the amusement park that's got, well, Juan Valdez and his donkey is, the mascots. I was there a few times years ago. I'm curious about it, but it's an attraction. It's something that I think everybody should see. It's 100% touristy. Whether you're from Bogota or whether you're from Medellin or whether you're from out of the country, it's completely touristy, but that doesn't mean it's not cool. And so I will probably hit maybe all three of those over the next, we'll say 4 to 5 weeks. And hopefully by then I've made enough so I can get to Medellin and do that. Does Linda work in Medellin? No, she doesn't. She works here in Armenia. Depending on the situation, she probably could travel, but she's not that old. She's 19 and would probably be nervous about going to Medellin and being alone. If you're in Medellin and you're wondering, she's been to Medellin before, but to go alone, she'd probably be scared to do that. But if we could if there's something that you need there and we could tie it into when I do go, then I could ride along with her to Medellin and she could do, whatever it is you need. And then she could go back with me. And I think under those circumstances, it would be fine. She does live with family. She helps at home. So she can't really be gone for more than we'll say a week. But Google Pay, thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate it very much. Finca or coffee farm tour. All right. I think I can put that together. I probably put that together within the next 2 weeks. I did the interview with the guy that does the birding, and he has a coffee tour. So I'll talk to him. Maybe I can get him to donate some or all of that, so I can do a video that would help promote him. Good, honest person. I wouldn't mind doing that at all, and also make it doable for me, so I don't have to try to come out of pocket for it. Let me see if I can do that. It's a good idea. Is there more restaurant reviews I can do in the immediate area? I don't think I've done any restaurant reviews outside of just show what I had for lunch or dinner. I could put together a video that talks about various restaurants in my area here in the north, which is where most people are interested. This is where it happens here in Armenia. I could probably put together something like that. Although how I do that, I can't really afford to go to them all in a short period of time. But I could talk about them and maybe do some photos off the internet or something like that. So I'll think about that. It's a good suggestion. Yeah, I haven't done any videos of a finca. Finca is a farm here. And I probably do it. I had one scheduled, but then, it fell through. I will. It's a good idea. Now, in the interview with the birding guy, he did talk pretty extensively about some of the concepts and what they do. It's pretty brilliant. But let me see if I can put it in picture for you. Okay, earthquake question. Number of buildings left after the big earthquake in Armenia. I don't know. 3/4 of the place was leveled from what I recall. 2/3 or 3/4 rings a bell. Good portion of it, and mostly on the north end. You know, here in the north is where it primarily hit. Now that doesn't mean all buildings were leveled. There's quite a few older buildings you'll see scattered, but the reason you see all this new construction, all these new buildings, is because after the earthquake. So it's been a while now, so there's really no sign of it anymore. But it hit pretty hard. It hit real hard. Fortunately, if history holds true, we won't see it for many lifetimes in the future. But you never know. I don't worry about it. I don't get concerned about things like that, because wherever you are, there's always something that can happen. I remember I was in Buffalo, New York, and an earthquake hit, and it did some damage where I was. I felt it, but didn't do damage where I was. I just felt it, but it did do quite a bit of damage. I didn't even know earthquakes happened there. But if you go on the earthquake website, it's amazing the extent of earthquakes that happen. Like Oklahoma gets like a couple hundred every day. I had no idea. I found out about this in a helicopter again. Can you guys hear that? When I was in Ecuador and that big one hit out on the coast, and and it was shaking my building to pieces, I got thinking about earthquake, and I went to the website and I started looking. And you look at the ring of fire that goes around the Pacific, and you see why there's so many down in Chile, for example. You can follow it down and why they're on the coast of Ecuador. Here you get a lot of tremors, but you don't get a lot of earthquakes, like big, strong, powerful, do a lot of damage earthquakes, because the tremors come relatively frequently, like a lot of places in the U.S. It seems to be top of mind for a lot of people. I don't worry about it. I don't think about it. I'm living in a place where they're conscious of earthquakes and they build accordingly. I don't get tornadoes. I don't get hurricanes. I don't get snowstorms. I don't get ice storms. I don't get heat waves. I don't have deadly mosquitoes, trying to kill me. So, I'll take a tremor once in a while. Do I see any future economic disaster in Colombia like in Ecuador? Well, like in Ecuador, absolutely not, because the country doesn't do what Ecuador did. They don't build up these big projects in order to win favor with the populace, and then go to the Chinese to get loans to try to pay for it that they shouldn't have done to begin with. It just doesn't happen here. Healthcare, I mentioned in Ecuador that they run $4 billion a year in debt. The healthcare system here, which is much less expensive, far better quality, and it runs in the black. It has no deficit. It's a private system overseen by the government. The government does put a fair amount of tax money into the system for the indigent poor. Like I said, there is some safety net, and so people just don't die on the sidewalks. There is a free health care for people that just don't have the money to pay for it. So they go that far, but they don't keep expanding it to get more votes or more political power. you know, they keep it to the original intention. These programs do not grow. Consequently, they don't have a big majority of their budget as giveaways. Ecuador does. Ecuador does have that, and governments can't sustain it. The United States, you know, they figured out they can't sustain it. It, you know, something falls down. The services, one way or the other, it collapses. If you don't have money for it, it's not gonna keep going. And here in Colombia, they pretty much pay as they go. I think they're much more thoughtful about the things that would create an economic issue. You know, like designing this Stratus system where there's zero cost to the government, and therefore there's no opportunity for government corruption with these big programs. One of the reasons, you know, in Ecuador, these big programs was money siphoned out of the country and into private accounts. So from that aspect, no. And Colombia itself, they've got thriving industry that is so diversified. They've got a major pharmaceutical industry here that sells obviously in Colombia, but they sell around the world. Very good pharmaceuticals at crazy low cost. I just bought a 10-pack of amoxicillin, 500 milligram each for someone. Okay, while you're out, could you pick this up? So I picked it up for somebody, and it cost $1 for a 10-pack of amoxicillin. I didn't need a prescription for it. It wasn't for me, but it was somebody actually had a prescription, but they didn't even ask me for it. $1. And it's as good as, I mean, it's not like some cut rate nasty thing. You've got a big shrimp industry. You've got, I think it's second in the world for gold and first or second for emeralds. So, I mean, that's a big thing. That's nothing to sneeze at. And you have this huge industrial base. Like when I was in Ecuador, you would see refrigerators and stoves and things like that that were built in Colombia. So it's not like they're here dependent. They make pretty much everything that they need, and they sell it. They export it. I've even seen in the United States a brand that's here. It's called Haseb, H-A-C-E-B. And I've seen that brand in the United States. It's made here in Colombia. They've got a gigantic fruit industry. You know, you'll see Colombian bananas all over the place. Everybody thinks Ecuador. But you go into the store in the United States and you look, and you've got as good or better chance that it's going to have a sticker that says Colombia on it. So Colombia is not dependent on other economies for its own sustainability. It creates its own wealth, its own growth, and it's responsible with how it spends it. And that goes back to the positives that I spoke to. So is it possible? I mean, anything is possible, but I don't think it's very likely. As a matter of fact, if there's another world crash, I think Colombia will probably get through it okay. You know, what else? Okay, I think that's it. Last call? Last call? Ivan, or is it Ivan? The question you had about Linda, if you were serious about that, send me an email. I would like to try to get her some, you know, some work. Education in Colombia and Ecuador. I think the desire and drive for education is probably fairly equal in Colombia and Ecuador, and it's a very important thing here. Anybody under the age of 30 here, it seems like they're either working a job or they're in the university, or maybe both. So many people here attend the university, but the universities here are so inexpensive. Now, in Ecuador, they had a system where they said you're going to get free education. It didn't really happen. You know, out of a class of 1,000, you might have 2 people that got a free education. It's kind of expensive there, but education is very much appreciated in Ecuador. The populations in both countries, I would say, are highly educated, as was Venezuela. Of course, that's all collapsed, but prior to all of this ugliness, Venezuela was an extremely highly educated country. And many of the people that you see coming refugees are professionals. You'll see well, I had a doctor friend. She was working in a cafe part-time. It was the best job she could get in Cuenca, and she was a surgeon. You know, go figure. But education is appreciated, and all these countries here, well, all Colombia, Venezuela, and Ecuador are very highly educated populations. All right. Hard for me to, as you know, hard for me to see. Socialism is the biggest worldwide threat. I completely agree. The more that you study, the more that you read history, the more that you actually look at facts and not political speak, you come to realize that it's a movement that's been going on for over 100 years, and they keep making headway, and they keep leaving disaster behind. But this is not a political channel, so I don't really want to go there, but yeah, I have to agree with you. No, it's not off topic. How do you handle dental care here? Well, dental is included in the health system. So if you get the basic health care here in Colombia, it includes eyewear with some limitations, like you can't go get the $400 frames of I don't know, Pierre Cardin or something like that, but you can get cheaper frames and basic lenses. If you want to get coatings and these get dark, then you've got to pay extra for it. But dental care, that is included with limitations, and it depends on the company that you go with, because these are private companies. So one company can provide better services for dental than maybe another country or company. So you always want to look at that. So no, not really off topic, it's kind of on topic. We're talking about all things Ecuador and Colombia here, and that's it. We're going to cut it here. We've gone 1 minute and 17, or 1 hour and 17 minutes. So I'll see you next Sunday, and I've got at least one video coming out in between, probably 2. Ciao.